In the dry interior of South Australia, roughly 800 kilometres north of Adelaide, the ground stretches flat and reddish-brown toward the horizon in every direction. Nothing on the surface looks out of the ordinary. Low salt bush, dry clay pans, and the faint grey tracks of a stock route crossing the plain. Then the surface gives way. What looks like empty scrubland from 3 kilometres off is actually a labyrinth of shafts and drives, where thousands of people live and work entirely below the surface. The remarkable thing is not that an entire town moved underground to escape 50-degree heat, but that the full extent of this subterranean network went unmapped by government surveyors for decades, treated as temporary diggings long after it grew into a permanent city in the rock. Why did a continent that appears geologically stable develop some of its largest settlements by retreating straight into its bedrock? And what is quietly happening to that ground now? Before examining that underground maze, consider two other places on this continent where the surface conceals a completely different scale. At a remote location in Western Victoria, an intricate system of stone channels and artificial ponds, built thousands of years ago, was brought back into light only when a sweeping bushfire cleared the dense canopy in a single afternoon. And along a quiet river bend in outback New South Wales, the rock beneath the water hides a geological discrepancy that forced state authorities to redraw official boundaries after a century of quiet error. For generations, the standard view was that Australia's interior was a uniform expanse of simple, ancient flatland, a hard, dry crust that was predictable, stable, and easily surveyed. In the 19th century, early mapping expeditions treated the vast inland plains as empty space to be partitioned by straight lines on a map. That assumption was entirely reasonable for its time. From the deck of a coastal ship or the saddle of an overland expedition, the landscape appeared timeless and unchanging. The first crack in that assumption appeared not in a laboratory, but in the official records of early mining and land surveys. The invisible gas rising through basement floors in the Adelaide Hills. In the Mount Lofty ranges of South Australia, the ancient Precambrian granite and fractured slate that form the spine of the ridge continually produce radon gas as trace uranium within the rock decays. In open air, the gas disperses without notice. Inside sealed brick homes built directly over fractured bedrock, radon accumulates in living quarters. Australian Radiation Protection and Nuclear Safety Agency surveys confirmed that while national outdoor averages remain low, localised indoor measurements in hilly bedrock areas frequently cross action thresholds, making radon the primary cause of lung cancer among non-smokers nationwide. The township erased by toxic tailings in the Pilbara. Wittenoom, situated on the edge of the Hamersley Range in Western Australia, produced blue asbestos from the late 1930s until 1966. Over those 3 decades, colonial sugar refining subsidiary Midwest Mining extracted over 160,000 tonnes of crucidolite. Millions of tonnes of loose asbestos tailings were dumped across the valley floor, used as driveway gravel, and spread over school playgrounds. In 2007, the Western Australian government formally degazetted Wittenoom, shutting down utilities, removing road signs, and declaring over 46,000 hectares a contaminated site to prevent public entry. The serene alpine creek that turns into a destructive torrent in under an hour. In the snowy mountains of New South Wales, the upper catchments of the Thredbo and Snowy rivers appear placid during dry summer periods. However, thin alpine soils over granite bedrock possess minimal absorption capacity. When isolated summer rainstorms drop 50 millimeters of rain on the peaks, runoff enters steep granite gorges immediately. River gauges recorded water levels rising more than 3 meters within 45 minutes, trapping bushwalkers on gravel bars without warning. The ground that drops into hidden caverns without warning in Western Victoria. Around Portland and Narracourt, extensive limestone plains cover ancient groundwater systems. Over millions of years, acidic rainwater dissolved the limestone beneath the topsoil, forming underground chambers. In August 2011, a sinkhole 12 meters wide and 15 meters deep opened overnight in a grazing paddock near Mount Gambier, swallowing farm equipment. Geological Survey of Victoria mapping indicates over 3,000 sinkholes across the newer volcanics and limestone region, many covered by less than a metre of surface clay. The dam structure that engineers realised could fail under extreme flood models. Warragamba Dam, impounding Lake Burragarang to supply Sydney's drinking water, was completed in 1960. In the late 1980s, revised hydrologic modelling revealed that a probable maximum flood could overtop the concrete wall, threatening structural failure and catastrophic flooding for downstream communities in the Hawkesbury Nepean Valley. Water NSW subsequently spent over $500 million constructing an auxiliary spillway to route extreme floodwaters safely around the main wall. The tick bite that removes meat from a diet permanently. Along the coastal bushland of New South Wales and Queensland, the Australian bush tick and the paralysis tick, Ixodes holocyclus, host a specific sugar molecule called alpha-gal in their saliva. When transmitted to a human bloodstream during a bite, the immune system develops antibodies against alpha-gal. Because red meat from beef, lamb, and pork contains the same sugar, subsequent consumption triggers severe anaphylaxis hours later. Research from Sydney universities identifies coastal Australia as a global hotspot for mammalian meat allergy. The riverbed turned into a heavy metal reservoir for a century. Around Broken Hill in far western New South Wales, silver, lead, and zinc mining began in 1883. Decades of uncontained smelting and tailings disposal released airborne dust and heavy metals into surrounding ephemeral creeks. Environmental sampling by Macquarie University researchers established that lead concentrations in floodplain sediments downstream of early smelters exceed health guidelines by several orders of magnitude, remaining immobile in dry soil until rare rain events wash them further into the regional basin. The eyeless cave fauna starving in complete darkness. Deep within the limestone caves of the Mole Creek karst system in Tasmania, specialised subterranean troglobites rely entirely on organic material carried from the surface. The primary nutrient transfer comes from cave-dwelling bats and invertebrates. As surface vegetation clearing and fungal diseases diminish bat colonies overhead, the input of guano drops, causing populations of endemic blind cave beetles to collapse. The crystalline spring water that fails biological safety tests. In the Great Artesian Basin outcrop zones of inland Queensland, spring water emerges crystal clear after filtering through sandstones over thousands of years. However, where surface fractures intersect shallow water tables near cattle properties, unsealed boreholes allow surface runoff containing coliform bacteria and agricultural nitrates to bypass the natural filter, contaminating local drinking water supplies while appearing pristine at the surface. The straight-line windstorm that flattens entire forests in 20 minutes. In the dense eucalyptus forests of the Dandenong Ranges and Gippsland in Victoria, localised downbursts known as derechos strike during severe summer storm fronts. In June 2021, a prolonged straight-line wind event with gusts exceeding 120 km per hour snapped millions of trees across thousands of hectares, destroying power infrastructure and isolating mountain townships for weeks without the rotating funnel characteristic of a tornado. The flooded cave systems that claim experienced divers. The sinkholes and cave networks around Mount Gambier, such as Shaft and Kilsby sinkhole, drop over 70 metres into clear, freezing groundwater. Despite extensive training and line markers, unexpected silt blowouts triggered by diver fins can drop visibility to zero in seconds, disorienting divers within narrow limestone fissures far from the surface entry point. The arsenic introduced through livestock feed that settled permanently into regional aquifers. In the intensive poultry farming belts of the inland slopes in New South Wales, roxarsone was routinely added to chicken feed for growth promotion prior to its voluntary phase-out in 2011. Geochemical sampling conducted by CSIRO and state water authorities across the Murrumbidgee catchment traced arsenic concentrations in groundwater. Mass spectrometry analysis of drill core samples from shallow alluvial aquifers confirmed that decades of chicken manure application deposited tons of organoarsenic compounds onto farm soils. In fractured rock systems, this residual arsenic dissolves into groundwater during recharge events, migrating toward regional drinking bores without degrading. The subterranean amphibian that physically undoes its vision as it matures. In the dark, water-filled limestone caverns of the Wellington Caves network in New South Wales, the endemic cave salamander begins life in surface streams with functional eyes and dark pigmentation. Biological surveys conducted by the Australian Museum revealed that as juvenile specimens migrate permanently into lightless subterranean chambers, skin tissue grows over the eyes and fuses shut while pigment production ceases entirely. Blood isotope tracking confirms these blind creatures depend on surface-derived organic matter, making their population counts an immediate indicator of aquifer purity. The longest destructive tornado track recorded in eastern Australia. On November 29, 1992, an F3 multi-vortex tornado touched down near Bucca in Queensland, cutting a continuous path over 60 kilometres long through forest and farmland. Bureau of Meteorology radar analysis and satellite imagery interpretation revealed that extreme atmospheric shear over the Great Dividing Range created supercell conditions capable of maintaining ground contact for over 45 minutes. Historical Weather Bureau logs show that for decades prior to 1950, official policy discouraged issuing public tornado warnings out of concern for civic panic, leaving communities along rural tracks without advance notice. The popular recreational lake where high bacterial counts were withheld during peak season. Lake Eildon in Victoria attracts over 1 million visitors every summer for swimming and boating. In January 2008, routine water quality sampling by local catchment management authorities detected Escherichia coli readings exceeding safe recreational limits by more than 10 times at multiple public ramp sites. Internal agency records released under Freedom of Information requests showed that water management officials delayed public closure notices for over 3 weeks during the peak holiday weekend to avoid damaging regional tourism revenue, leaving families swimming in contaminated water fed by aging septic runoff. The fluorescent dye trace that proved urban sewage drains straight into regional springs. To map the unpredictable flow paths of water through fractured karst limestone, hydrogeologists from Geoscience Australia injected non-toxic fluorescent tracer dyes into municipal stormwater drains and unsealed septic trenches near Jenolan Caves. Within 48 hours, fluorometer detectors placed at natural freshwater springs 7 kilometers away picked up intense dye concentrations. The test proved that surface contaminants bypass soil filtration entirely, traveling through open underground rock conduits directly into domestic water supplies without natural purification. The fungal pathogen decimating subterranean bat colonies across southern caves. Deep within the bat roosting caves of Narracourt in South Australia, microchiropteran bat populations have suffered severe declines. Wildlife pathologists using genomic sequencing identified Pseudogymnoascus destructans, a cold-loving European fungus likely introduced on the boots of cavers. The fungus disrupts winter hibernation, causing bats to burn critical fat reserves and starve. Because a single microbat consumes up to its body weight in night-flying insects, the loss of millions of bats has forced agricultural producers to increase synthetic pesticide applications across surrounding cropland. The severe ice storm that shattered power grids and timber stands in a single night. In July 1990, an extreme freezing rain event swept across the central tablelands of New South Wales, depositing over 5 centimetres of clear ice on exposed surfaces. Aeromagnetic and aerial photograph interpretations conducted by the State Forestry Commission mapped thousands of hectares of pine and eucalyptus plantations snapped clean at the trunk under the immense weight. Over 200,000 homes lost power for more than 2 weeks as ice pulled down regional transmission towers across hundreds of kilometres. The dropped maintenance tool that nearly triggered a catastrophic missile explosion. In 1960, during the Cold War, liquid-fueled strategic rockets were maintained in reinforced underground silos across remote areas of Australia. During routine maintenance at a testing facility, an engineer dropped a heavy spanner down an 80-foot launch shaft. The tool struck the missile's thin aluminium fuel tank, causing a high-pressure hypergolic fuel leak that pressurized the silo with volatile fumes. While emergency crews evacuated the perimeter, safety interlocks prevented detonation, but the incident led to the permanent decommissioning and burial of the silo complex under gravel. The industrial hog facility permitted adjacent to a protected wild river catchment. The Wild Rivers Act was established to safeguard pristine waterways across northern Queensland, including the Mitchell River system. However, in 2012, state planning authorities approved an intensive piggery housing thousands of animals on a tributary just 8 kilometres upstream from the protected park boundary. Water sampling by marine researchers subsequently detected massive nutrient plumes and filamentous algae blooms moving downstream through porous sandstone aquifers, forcing the state government to buy out the operation for $6 million to preserve the aquatic ecosystem. The apex predator returning to coastal ranges while official maps list them as extinct. Apex carnivores like the mainland quoll and feral wildcats were officially declared eradicated across vast tracts of southern New South Wales by the mid-20th century. However, field monitoring using infrared camera traps and environmental DNA sampling conducted by National Parks and Wildlife Service teams confirmed over 100 verified sightings across the South Coast ranges over the past decade. DNA analysis of hair samples retrieved from rub posts confirmed breeding pairs operating in remote gullies, proving top-level predators can recolonize rugged terrain long before official biodiversity registers record their presence. The The 6-decade ban on official tornado forecasts. Across eastern Australia, severe supercell thunderstorms routinely generate tornadoes during spring and summer months. Yet from the late 19th century until 1950, Commonwealth meteorological authorities enforced a strict policy prohibiting forecasters from using the word tornado in public broadcasts. The official justification was that public panic posed a greater risk than the storm itself. As a result, thousands of residents along rural storm tracks received no specific warnings prior to major destructive wind events, relying instead on generalized severe weather advisories. The world's most biodiverse cave ecosystem collapsing from surface runoff. Beneath the limestone hills of the Mole Creek area in northern Tasmania, cave streams harbour over 100 specialised subterranean species, including rare troglodytic snails and freshwater amphipods. Water monitoring by the Tasmanian Department of Natural Resources and Environment showed that agricultural clearing, fertiliser runoff, and unsealed septic tanks overhead drove species counts down sharply over a decade. Sedimentation clogging subterranean gravel beds has reduced localised snail populations by over 90%, demonstrating that cave environments directly reflect surface land management. The regional clandestine laboratory crisis that left an environmental footprint. During the early 2000s, rural areas across regional Victoria and New South Wales recorded high numbers of clandestine synthetic drug laboratories operating in isolated farmhouses and sheds. Beyond the immediate social impact, state EPA assessments revealed that for every kilogram of product manufactured, up to 6 kilograms of toxic chemical waste, including anhydrous ammonia and volatile organic solvents, were dumped directly into unlined pits or rural waterways. Remediation costs for contaminated soils continue to burden regional councils decades after site closures. The brain-eating amoeba thriving in warm recreational waters. Lake Bogue and several inland water storage reservoirs across northern Victoria host Naegleria fowleri, a heat-loving single-celled organism present in warm, fresh water. When water forced up the nasal passage allows the amoeba to enter the central nervous system, primary amoebic meningoencephalitis develops, carrying a mortality rate above 99%. Health departments in Victoria and Queensland conduct regular water sampling, issuing public warnings as summer water temperatures exceed 24 degrees Celsius. The mile-wide tornado that erased a regional township. On November 29, 1992, an F3 tornado measuring over 800 metres wide struck the rural township of Bucca in Queensland. Winds exceeding 250 kilometres per hour destroyed steel frame structures, overturned heavy agricultural equipment, and stripped bark from mature eucalyptus trees. The Bureau of Meteorology noted that the event proved severe supercells in subtropical Australia could produce destructive ground-level damage matching North American tornado alley benchmarks. The invasive pest species outbreeding eradication programs across national parks. In the alpine and subalpine zones of Kosciuszko National Park, feral pigs and horses disrupt fragile peat bogs and sphagnum moss communities. Ground surveys by Parks Victoria and New South Wales National Parks and Wildlife Service estimate that invasive feral pigs cause millions of dollars in agricultural and environmental damage annually, transmitting diseases like brucellosis to stock while destroying habitat for threatened native species like the corroboree frog. The brutal winter death march through the mountain passes. During the 19th century, forced displacements and frontier conflicts across the alpine regions of southern New South Wales and Victoria led to severe loss of life among First Nations populations driven from traditional lands during winter months. Historical records document groups forced across exposed high country ridges in sub-zero temperatures, where exposure and hunger caused widespread deaths along routes now mapped as scenic rural highways. The military testing site storing chemical agents over karst water tables. At defence testing facilities such as the Proof and Experimental Establishment at Port Wakefield in South Australia and former chemical weapons storage areas near Marangaroo in New South Wales, live agent testing and firefighting exercises introduced per- and polyfluoroalkyl substances, known as PFAS, into regional soil. Department of Defence groundwater monitoring confirmed PFAS plumes migrating through fractured bedrock aquifers toward local agricultural bores, requiring multi-million-dollar water filtration installations for surrounding residents. The 19th century bushranger gang that operated out of hidden rock formations. South of Forsyth in northern Queensland, rugged granite outcrops provided natural fortifications for bushbanding networks in the 1860s. Gangs used narrow boulder clefts to ambush travellers along goldfield supply roads before disappearing into country that colonial police mapped as impenetrable wilderness. The mountaintop reservoir failure that swept through a national park valley. In December 2005, the upper reservoir wall of a pumped storage hydroelectric facility in Reynolds County gave way, releasing over 5 million cubic meters of water in minutes. The wall breached after water level sensors failed, sending a wave down Prophet Mountain that stripped forest to bare granite bedrock and destroyed park ranger facilities in the valley below. The masked night riders whose lynchings were transformed into regional folklore. Across the rural ranges of southern Victoria in the late 19th century, vigilante groups wearing cloth masks operated outside colonial law, conducting extrajudicial punishment against local landholders. Decades later, local tourism boards rebranded these violent historical episodes as theatrical bushranger heritage, obscuring recorded homicides under folk performance. The township completely erased from state maps due to industrial dioxin contamination. In the early 1970s, an unsealed rural settlement along the river flats of regional New South Wales contracted private waste haulers to spray road oil for dust suppression. Chemical testing later revealed the oil contained high concentrations of toxic dioxin. When major flooding spread the contaminant across residential yards in 1982, the state government declared the area uninhabitable, purchased every property, demolished the structures, and struck the town name permanently from regional cadastral records. The submerged towns resting beneath recreational reservoirs. Across the Murray-Darling Basin, major water storage projects like Lake Eildon, Lake Hume, and Snowy Mountains reservoirs flooded dozens of historic 19th century townships during construction. During severe droughts, as storage levels drop below 20%, stone foundations, road culverts, and bridge footings re-emerge along dry mudflats, revealing the intact grids of flooded communities. The major intraplate fault line, capable of rewriting regional geography without warning. Along the eastern margin of the continent lies the active intraplate fault system, responsible for the 1989 Newcastle earthquake and historic shocks exceeding magnitude 7. Unlike plate boundary faults, intraplate fractures accumulate strain slowly over centuries in crust assumed to be completely stable. Geoscience Australia models indicate that a magnitude 7 event along this zone would threaten critical infrastructure across major urban corridors, producing ground motion far exceeding regional building design standards. What kept these 35 phenomena unnoticed for so long was not their depth or remote location, but an administrative assumption that a published topographical map sheet represented a complete inventory of the physical ground. Geoscience Australia, state geological surveys, and university research teams continue to deploy airborne LiDAR and satellite interferometry to resolve these hidden structures. Yet vast subterranean networks and old contamination plumes remain unmapped beneath active farmland. The official map sheet always looks finished, even while the bedrock beneath it continues to shift, dissolve, and decay. Which item in this run across the continent surprised you most? Or is there a place in your own state or territory that has always struck you as odd? Mention it in the comments below, and consider subscribing to stay with us for the next investigation.